This is Right Around Australia, the story of Nevill Westwood and his Citroën Bubsie on Faith FM. In 2025, the incredible journey will be reenacting another incredible journey undertaken 100 years earlier by young Nevill Westwood, who accidentally achieved the record of being the first person to drive right around Australia. Here is part 9 of his exciting story. The year is 1925. There was huge excitement in Darwin when the HMS Manila pulled into port while Nevill and Greg were there. She was a passenger cargo ship and, according to Nevill, was luxurious inside, having been built for the Kaiser. Other sources say that the ship had also conveyed the King of Afghanistan and his party from Karachi to Bombay at the start of his world tour. Nevill had gotten to know a Mr. May, who invited Nevill on board and showed him around. Mr. May was a government inspector in the Malay States, and before Nevill left, he offered him a job at £40 a month, rising to £50 after 6 months. It would have been a tempting proposition, especially when Mr. May said they were desperate for good men like Nevill. But Nevill was employed by the King of Heaven and could not be persuaded to take the job, and the HMS Manila left for Singapore the following day without him. After taking orders for £150 worth of books, Nevill and Greg caught the train back to Galan, now Catherine, armed with a supply of second-hand Harley-Davidson, Triumph, and Indian motorcycle inner tubes. To their delight, the tubes and tires all fitted, and they eagerly continued their journey. Soon after leaving Galan, they met a prospector trudging down the road, pulling all his possessions in a cart behind him. He was suffering from man poisoning, and had travelled 644 kilometres in search of a doctor. Nevill offered him a lift, but as the prospector only had 160 kilometres to go, he firmly refused. They passed the Elsie homestead, home of Jeannie and Aeneas Gunn, whose book, We of the Never Never, had catapulted them to fame. Travel was still difficult with few tracks or roads to follow, and of course, few signs to help them. At one point, they thought they were hopelessly lost, until they stumbled onto the wreckage of a burnt-out car. It had belonged to Francis Birtles, an adventurer who completed the first west to east crossing of Australia in 1912, in his car. In 1921, he was again in his motor car near the Elsie homestead, when the car caught fire and he was badly injured. Nevill knew the story of Birtles, and seeing the wreck, affirmed they were on the right track after all. They later came across the overland telegraph line, which linked Darwin to Adelaide, and were able to follow it to Daly Waters Station. On the 29th of October, they crossed into Queensland through the rabbit-proof fence, and Bubsie could now claim the distinction of being the first car to travel from Perth to Queensland. Soft sand in creek beds was always a problem, but because the little Citroën was so light, it could be dug out, pushed, pulled, or lifted more easily. At Toowoomba, they were met by a Mr. France, an agent for Citroën, who gave them new tires and tubes and filled their car with petrol and oil. Nevill, on his epic journey in Bubsie, was good publicity for Citroën, and they were happy to cultivate his patronage. Nevill began to realize that he had become something of a celebrity when he arrived in Brisbane on the 6th of November and found the newspapers full of articles about his trip. Reporters from the Queenslander met him and took photographs of him and Bubsie, for which they paid him to help with his travel expenses. It was 2,740 kilometres from the Northern Territory to Brisbane, yet the little Citroën had completed the journey in only 7 days. It was still a long way back to Perth, but Nevill and Greg were sure of success. Stay tuned to Faith FM for the next installment of this series, Right Around Australia, the story of Nevill Westwood and his Citroën Bubsie. For more information about this program, visit the website of The Incredible Journey, online at tij.tv/RAA.